and delighted to be here this morning moderating this panel on frameworks and metrics and ensuring integrity in the way we measure and report on sustainability. Now, this has obviously become quite a hot topic over the last 3-4 years or so, and rightly so, because if we can't measure, how can we manage? And if we can't measure, how can we report? And I think there's a real momentum behind the food and agriculture transition now. I mean, yes, we've still got a long way to go, but the fact that all these sessions are happening here, the fact there's a farm in the middle of the green zone, and obviously the Food Systems Declaration yesterday shows that we're really moving on food and farming now. But I think there's slightly varying degrees of authenticity in terms of strategies that are at play. And in my view, and the work of the Sustainable Food Trust is quite heavily focused on this measurement and reporting side of things, because we feel it's the antidote to greenwashing. It holds people to account if we all measure and report in the same way. But critically, those measurement frameworks should not be imposed only from the top down by businesses and government. They have to empower people on the ground, in this case farmers, to drive the change that we all need to see. So we're going to hear from a really diverse set of speakers today. There's a lot of speakers, so bear with me. I'm going to have to be quite militant with the timings. We're first going to hear from some sort of government and then private sector representatives to tell you a little bit about what they're working on in terms of frameworks and what we might expect over the next couple of years. And then we're going to switch it up and hear from some farmers and understand what's important to them with measurement. You know, how can we help farmers on the ground feed into this process, but then of course make sure that these frameworks actually allow them to understand how they can incrementally be a little bit better each year. Or of course, if they're already amazing, tell the world what they're doing. And so, yeah, so we're going to hear from all those perspectives, and hopefully, if we've got time, have a few questions at the end. But we've got a lot to get through, so I'm going to kick off and introduce the wonderful panel. And what I'll do is I'll just kind of introduce you guys, but allow you to say a little bit more about yourselves. And I think, firstly, just to answer from your perspective, so why is this conversation really important? Why do we need frameworks? And Emil, I'm going to start with you, and it would be great to hear a little bit about the Agroecology Coalition and why you feel the principles of agroecology are so important to underpin this conversation.
Thank you. So I'm also a member of the International Panel of Experts on Sustainable Food Systems, IPES Food, and senior advisor to the Agroecology Coalition. I think that we really have to have a framework that is looking at all the important dimensions and not just at what is easy to measure, and that we don't focus just on the production side, but at the entire food system. And I think too much attention has still been going on simple metrics, whether it's carbon or other simple not always simple to measure, but simple concepts, and really going towards the complexity. And that's where the 13 principles of agroecology really look at the entire food system and look at all the dimensions, including all the social dimensions that are very often forgotten. When we talk about transition, many people have in mind just changing some agricultural practices to make them more resilient and more sustainable, but that's not going to do the trick. We really need to have a redesign of the systems that looks at also the well-being of farmers, the impact on health, the impact on climate, on biodiversity, etc., in an integrated way. And therefore, these 13 principles are extremely useful. And we've been working on a way to assess how initiatives and projects are actually contributing to the implementation of each of the 13 principles. And these principles are a package. It's not a picking list where you say, I'm addressing number 2 and 5 and I'm doing an agroecological transformation. It's a package that needs to be addressed all together, and we have to measure the contribution to each of these 13 principles to see how we are doing. So I think there's still a long way to go, but we start having the tools now to do that assessment. And an online tool has just been made available by the Agroecology Coalition on its website that allows us to do this kind of assessment on project proposals. So it's not looking at the final impact on the ground. There are different tools for that. But the idea, the intention, to measure the intention of project proposals or initiatives, how much they will contribute, is now available on the website.
Thank you. And at the moment, how are you feeding these ideas into these bigger global conversations? Are there global projects that you're involved with where these principles of agroecology are directly feeding in, so everyone, hopefully starts using these same definitions?
Well, one thing is it's important that the people that are funding and investing in agroecology, in transformation, are actually aware of that. And this is one thing that the coalition has engaged in. There's a working group on financing and investment, which organized in October a convening of bilateral, multilateral, philanthropic donors, development banks, private investors, to see how they can really take on board the framework of the 13 principles and look at complementarities between the different funding mechanisms. Loans by development banks, complemented by grants by bilateral donors, by philanthropic foundations that maybe address the needs of smallholder farmer groups or civil society organizations. And I think that's one way that the coalition has been acting now to make sure that these frameworks are being understood and being used.
Brilliant, thank you. So, Zitunia, I'm going to come to you next to ask you a question from a government perspective. And you're about to launch your 1.5 degree C aligned roadmap for a 1.5 degree C aligned world. How are you defining sustainability using outcome frameworks as part of that process at the moment?
Thank you. First of all, we're really very pleased where we are now. We came really long way, at least since Glasgow, when we've been raising the flag for food and agriculture to be really considered properly in this context and to focus more on the solutions that the agri-food systems actually can bring to reducing greenhouse gas emissions and also to building adaptation and resilience. Because we have so many contradictions in the agri-food systems, unfortunately. Agriculture is the most affected, the most vulnerable sector to climate change. And at the same time, the sector also contributes in a third to the global greenhouse gas emissions. And if you dive deeper into what's happening in the whole food chain, we have almost 800 million people that go hungry every day. And in the other part of the spectrum, we have 2 billion people who are obese or overweight. And then we throw so much food away as well. So there is a problem in the whole system. And you mentioned the roadmap is one way of us actually looking at giving some clarity to what are the issues that we need to look at, not just from a government point of view or UN system, but the whole community involved in this chain. Where do we need to tackle this transformation of the agri-food system? And that's what we're aiming to do through the roadmap. How do we align the agricultural sector with the Paris Agreement goal of achieving 1.5 degree and also looking at defeating hunger, the SDG 2, looking at the combination. And what we would like to see happening is, on one hand, give some clarity to the policymakers on which key pathways the world need to focus on. And it was really great, yesterday or the day before yesterday, to see this progress on loss and damage and really put in some financial support there to drive this. So this is one aspect. The first one is for clarity for the policymakers. The second one is clarity for the investors. So we keep talking about the transformation and where we need finance, but where does finance has to go? And that's what we're trying also to clarify. We talk about greenhouse gas emissions from the sector, but we tend to forget about methane emissions as well that are really important. And the last point I make is with regard to the complexity of food and agriculture. It is a very complex and complicated issue. So when we talk about reporting and measurement, it's not easy. It's extremely challenging because we have a sector that varies from one part of the world to another. Even within the same country, we have different systems. We have smallholder farmers, we have big farms, medium farms, the tradition, the knowledge that varies, and we have to be, very attentive to this reality of agriculture on the ground, and that's what we're trying to reflect. But the point I'm making here is when we talk about the reporting and is the complexity of the whole system. Something we need to tackle, but we have to be patient. We have to consider these differences in circumstances, in knowledge, in culture that is important for agriculture, that is a traditional sector, if you like. Thank you.
And from your perspective, Zitouni, from the FAO, I should have introduced you at the beginning. Do you feel when it comes to setting frameworks, this should be done by governments, or should the private sector lead and governments follow? What do you feel?
Everyone should be involved in the framework. It shouldn't be just government or others, including farmers. They should be really having a voice in this. And this is what we've been doing with the UAE presidency in developing a framework for to accelerate the transformation of agri-food systems. And this is linked to the declaration, by the way. The framework has 4 pillars, and supporting countries, that's the first pillar. That includes the declaration. Why the declaration is important? Because we wanted to have the political will first, the political commitment, and then from there you can start into building strategies, into giving guidelines. You need that commitment first, you need that ownership, and this is really critical. So the answer to your question is, food concerns everyone. So it's not just one community or another that needs to lead and set the framework. Everyone has to have a voice, including smallholder farmers.
Okay, cool. I'm interested in your views when we've got more time about how that might happen. But Stefano, I want to move to you and have a bit of an overview of what's happening with the private sector at the moment. You represent OP2B and are thinking a lot about this at the moment. So what are you working on, and what do you think is important when it comes to this conversation?
Thank you, Adele. So yes, I'm Stefania Mancini. I'm the director for One Planet Business for Biodiversity. So as the name says, we're a business coalition that was founded 4 years ago by agricultural value chain players who really believe that there is a need to revolutionize, I was thinking, our agricultural models, transform our agricultural models within planetary boundaries, and so bet on the scaling up of regenerative agriculture, which is rooted and in agroecological practices. So just that we know what we're talking about. I have a good news. One is, which is also bad news, and one is that since 30 years, I think the agroecological movement has been preaching about the need to transform to a holistic model. And the good news is the private sector has realized it and is really and has realized the importance of it. And why? Is because there is a real sense of urgency. Today we can see already in large business value chain that business as usual, so traditional industrial farming is hurting farmers and businesses. So this is there's a real sense of urgency. And the other important thing is today the reality is large ag value chain players, because they invest and support farmers to transition to more resilient, more regenerative, more sustainable agricultural practices, because it's as I said, a resiliency, so there is a real business risk. And secondly, the largest one have also taken commitments to decarbonize, to achieve a net zero, and so they also have the pressure from investors and from their shareholders to reduce their emissions, and so this is part of it. But it's not only about climate. I really want to emphasize that today the business sector understands that it's about a holistic approach, and it's about shifting to a model that has environmental but also socioeconomic benefits. where we stand today is maybe it's very fragmented. It's very complex. I would say today most companies have their own frameworks, procurement frameworks, and they have put together results-based rewarding schemes. This means they pay a premium to farmers if they achieve a set of outcomes. The good news is there is strong consensus. It's the right momentum to drive convergence. There is strong consensus on the most important environmental outcomes. We still need to work on the socioeconomic ones. And I want to acknowledge there is much work to be done. A partner organization like Sci Platform, who's just published a farm level framework, or even Textile Exchange, who represents over 850 companies, has published there. So there is a strong convergence and momentum today. And businesses are calling for a widespread industry alignment on a global set of metrics. And this is the work that we are doing. We just created a convening space, trying to assemble over 1,100 companies. And so I say the time is now for convergence. And the second very important message that the business also have to understand, we are only there to support. Like, millions of farmers have the solutions, and they are driving the transformation. And so the importance of driving a farmer-centric framework is very important. And this is why we are very proud to support a multi-stakeholder initiative called the Region 10, which really sets the ambition, and Adele from the Sustainable Food Trust is also in there, where it sets the ambition to develop a farmer-centric framework. So what is important for farmers, and we will make then the connection for businesses.
Thank you, Stefania. And do you think there's more hunger from businesses now for primary data from farmers to inform these measurement and reporting frameworks? Right, because at the moment we mostly rely on proxy data from models. So the average impact of a orange being farmed roughly in this way in California, whereas I think now we're talking about actual data from farms, which picks up on the nuance of what's happening on individual land holdings. Do you think businesses are really wanting that, or are we not quite there yet?
I think one of the biggest challenges that we haven't cracked is that as we shift to an agricultural system where we want to measure, there is a huge cost. And today, measurement, reporting, and verification tools, they are for sure, there needs a lot of innovations are needed, but the cost of this is quite high. And let's not build a system where the cost of measurement is higher than actually the implementation. I really want to make sure and acknowledge that we want that the investments in agriculture, who are already too small and need to be higher, stay at the field and with the farmers, and not in the measurement and MRV systems. And this is the real challenge, I think, with the primary data collection. And I don't have the answer, but probably a system where the two are there are important. And so I would call there for innovations, but also from some pragmatic thing. And you were outlining it. It's a very complex system, and I think the solution will be simplicity. We will not be able to measure everything, but if we find a core set of global metrics that then can be adapted per farming archetypes, that can be adapted for place-based, but we have a universal core set of metrics that each community agrees, farmers feel it's important, the businesses feel these are the ones they want to incentivize, and so pay a premium for farmers for. Municipalities and investors and financial actors feel those are too. This is, I think, what we are actually is our objective, what we're driving for. And then, of course, agriculture is very place-based, so at a local level, they will be much more diverse. But this is what is needed to drive the simplicity and to drive because as we were saying, what we're needing to drive this transformation, even though you're hearing from me, ag value chain players are very committed, is much more investment. Agriculture is not only about food companies, it's much more textile, and many other actors are also involved. And so we need to drive that convergence on a simple set of indicators. And so I think simplicity is the thing we still need to crack, and we're working hard on it.
Fantastic, thank you. So, Noosa, I expect you might agree with what I said at the beginning about common, robust measurement being the antidote to greenwashing, because you've just written a report, or are about to release a report on this theme. Do you want to just introduce yourself and describe a little about what you found with that?
Yeah. Thank you very much. I'm Noosa Urbantic. I'm the CEO of the Changing Markets Foundation. We work on different campaigns, so food, fashion, but also we kind of like to look a little bit more widely into corporate greenwashing and also climate targets, we have a website, greenwash.com. If you want to see how greenwashing looks like in practice, have a look. We're looking at fashion, food, and plastic kind of packaging types of greenwashing. And yeah, what I would like to say is that, our main approach to food is like, climate change is a really, really important issue. It will really impact how we produce food. It will impact companies, the profitability of what they're involved in, and it's really in the interest of companies to address climate change. And the most important element here is actually the methane emissions. And agriculture is responsible for 40%. It's the single biggest source. And then, when we look at what companies are actually doing, a lot of them are actually focusing on regenerative agriculture, but they're not really, really focusing on reducing CO2 and methane emissions. And therefore, from this, it comes this concern that, this might lead to greenwashing, because we don't really have a definition, or we have a very vague definition now that SAI platform came up with. And when you look at that definition, there are some good indicators, right? But like when you look at what they're doing on climate change, there's nothing about methane, there's nothing about CO2, there's nothing about reducing livestock numbers. And this is a huge problem, right? Because you cannot start your transformation by, omitting the most important things that you can do. And one of the big companies whose climate target we also investigated is Nestle. And Nestle has, they're the biggest food companies, so they have huge CO2 emissions, they have huge methane emissions, and their main kind of strategy on CO2 is actually regenerative agriculture, but it's not very well defined. So it's when New Climate Institute and Carbon Market Watch looked at it, they called it insetting, right? So they're doing insetting, which is not really a strategy you should be doing, as a priority. You should be focusing on emissions reductions, on reducing methane emissions, and yeah, that's why we're a little bit concerned, that like kind of reducing emissions gets forgotten in this holistic approach, and then SAI platform has very, very weak definition, but then when you look at what it also requires, you're only, as a farmer or as a company, you're only allowed to make progress on 2 of the indicators, right? Which is very weak. And I do think that, we do need to include all the stakeholders in those conversations, right? But like, we need to ensure that, we are putting science at the center of this, and like reducing emissions, reducing livestock numbers, making sure that regenerative farming actually looks at reducing livestock numbers and how we can make those things better on the ground. I think it's really important. And I also wanted to say the report that we just launched before COP, it actually looked at misinformation. So we looked at like the period of 14 months, we analyzed 285 million posts around agriculture, food, meat, alternative protein, right? Everything. And out of those 285 million posts, almost 1 million posts was misinformation. And greenwashing actually surprisingly was only 4% of the data set. Like the biggest percentage, 37%, was conspiracy theories, right? About Great Reset, global agenda, so elites trying to take over. But this is really, really significant, right? And it is driving what we've seen. It is driving misinformation, for example, in the case of Netherlands on the nitrogen policy, where the government was really struggling with the environmental pollution. And, in fairness, they probably haven't done a really great job. They kicked the can down the road several times, and then it became really urgent. But when this started to happen, that they're actually putting financial resources and offering farmers to basically take this money and stop farming if they're close to the vulnerable areas, far right got involved, and this is transnational far right, and they actually really kind of used the farmers' protest for their own purposes. They linked it with anti-immigration rhetorics, and then it's hard to prove how this influenced elections, right? But it was a significant spike on social media, and it actually resulted, in some kind of electoral outcome. And, when you look at the greenwashing data set, regenerative agriculture is like a huge set of greenwashing where there are people saying, you don't actually, cows are carbon neutral. Methane is not a problem because, it just gets absorbed in the biogenic cycle and things like that. So I think it's also important that we're conscious of that because, this is the narrative that is pushed by big meat and dairy companies. And then, it kind of manifests itself in the social media, and it increases polarization, and it prevents political action, climate policies, and things like that.
Brilliant, thank you. And to put you on the spot a little bit, in a sentence or two, imagine we're at COP30. Everyone's talking about COP30 next year. It's just we're forgetting about next year. But imagine we're at COP30. What would you like to see being announced as a antidote against what you're saying, basically?
Yeah, I mean, I think it will probably be hard to address misinformation, right? But I expect to see another spike where FAO roadmap comes out. But I mean, what we still need to do is really go back to the science, to what the science tells us, right? And the science is actually quite clear that we need to reduce production of livestock to stay in line with 1.5 degree temperature, but we can do it in a really good way because let's face it, we're using 80% of agricultural land to produce 20% of protein. And it's also not the healthiest food, right? So if we kind of can move towards healthy, sustainable, more plant-based diets, and that also becomes a priority, I'm very encouraged that it was mentioned, like sustainable consumption and production was mentioned in the Leaders' Declaration, right? But I do think we need to make this the center of it, right? It's not about the volumes of what we produce, it is about what kind of food we want to eat, the healthy food. And, let's look at that because there will be more people on the planet, right? So addressing this issue becomes even more urgent.
Absolutely, and I think this is where this conversation about data becomes so important because, as you're saying, industrial livestock systems, of course, we want to move away from those, but there is livestock which are part of the solution, and I think that transparency and information about which livestock, just taking an example, are part of the solution and which ones aren't, it's really difficult for people to know that right now. So of course everyone's like, go plant-based because we don't have the information to make a slightly more nuanced decision. So I think it's going to be incredibly important. Emil, do you want to come in and then we're going to go to some farmer perspectives?
Yeah, I think the issue about greenwashing around the term of regenerative is an important one because, as you said, there is no agreed definition of what it means. And that's in opposition with agroecology that has a clear definition. FAO has developed the 10 elements of agroecology that have been agreed by the member countries. That is more difficult to greenwash that. There are attempts as well, and on the website of CropLife International, you find agroecology in a very different interpretation. But at least there is a clear definition that has been internationally agreed. And it's much easier with regenerative. And that's why I think it is useful to try to use the term agroecology as opposed to regenerative, even though regenerative is very attractive because it's more clearly expressing the regenerative nature of what you want to do. But because of the lack of definition, I think maybe combining the two, regenerative agroecological food systems, etc., is a useful way of trying to minimize, we won't do away with it, but minimize the risk of greenwashing and say, well, what we want is really looking at all the 10 elements and 13 principles.
Thank you. Do you want me just? I just want to state a few comments. One, I just want to correct one thing is that be it SCI platform or many other frameworks, there are two important metrics linked to climate that are mentioned and that are important to follow. One is the overall greenhouse gas emissions per farm. So overall total farm emissions is an important indicator, and the one is the sequestered carbon in the soil. And we just aligned 1,100 businesses on them. We're working also on the nature and water one. So there is, and actually I would say from the work that I see, if there is one indicator today that the business sector is following and monetizing and rewarding farmers for, is carbon. What we are pushing them on is it's not only about carbon. You also need to monetize and reward the other ones. Just a clarification there, but I want to also come back, Emile, what you were saying, which is important. I think it's building the bridges. We are working towards transforming our agricultural models that work within planetary boundaries. I think acknowledging the diversity of stakeholders, they have maybe different vision, and for sure the concept of regeneration. How do I regenerate soils to minimize my negative aspects, to maximize the positive aspects that I can bring is a very I would say appealing concept. And this is why the work that we do is we build the bridges, because it is about the same thing. It is rooted and based on agroecological principles. But it is sometimes we have different languages is to also bring in different stakeholders on board. What's important is that the direction is the same, and in here the direction is we're trying to work to transform agricultural models that work with nature and not against them. And today we can prove that the today's model work against.
If you allow one
Very tiny
second,
concern.
yes. No, about the terminology. We had in 2021 with IFOAM Organics International, Regeneration International, Agroecology Europe, IPES Food, Feeble, and agreed that all these, whatever you call them, we all share the desire to implement the 13 principles. That's what we all stand behind. And as long as that is clear, whether you call it one way or the other doesn't really matter. It's what is behind it that counts.
I agree.
Thanks.
So I think you guys stay here. Is this? Tell me if this is allowed. And then if we ask some of the farmers in the room to come up and use this mic and share some perspective. Oh, another mic. Okay. I know we've got Michael here. Other farmers in the room? Here? Here? Okay, perfect. So I think it'd be nice if you come to the front and say a few words. I'll swap places with you. If you want to just respond. I think if you guys stay here so you can answer questions. Oh, have you got to go?
Okay.
No, I don't
No,
have to go.
okay.
Just to leave them.
Because I think people might have questions for you all. So, Michael, if you come up and share a few thoughts and reflections, and talk a little bit about when it comes to measurement, what's important to you on the ground.
Okay, so our farm, from a farm in Australia, east coast of Australia, at about 1,000 metres. We're running between 3,000 and 6,000 sheep, and between 50 and a couple hundred cattle. We also have a agroforestry enterprise. We've planted 250,000 trees on our place. And we're also RWS certified, so with our Superfine Merino. We've always had a fairly long history of being involved in sustainable ag. Apparently it's called regenerative ag now. Apparently there's all these other names that have been put on us as well. Really, it doesn't matter what it's called, agroecology, agro-silvipastoral, silvopasture, agroforestry. We're growing stuff. We're growing food and fibre. More recently, in regards to measurement, since about 2018, we've been involved with a project that's started to measure the natural capital and the social well-being and compare that, put that up aside our financial reports. So that measurement and reporting is showing that we're sequestering on a bit over 200 tonnes of CO2 a year on our farm. We're attempting to balance conservation and production. We graze our sheep and cattle everywhere. We are growing trees and conserving areas of biodiversity. And the measurement of that is quite complex, as you say. It's not simple. Before we had that, we had a policy of an open door policy. Before we could measure stuff, the only way our wool buyers in Italy, for example, could be sure that they were buying from a farm that was managing their land well and looking after our animals was to have them come and visit us. So getting consumers, getting customers, getting buyers, getting industry people out on farms has been a really big one for us. before the measurement arrived. But that measurement now has arrived, and it's not all the way there yet. There's again, it is complex, but it's getting there, and there's a lot of readily accessible desktop measurement that can be done too. So basic ground cover, tree cover measurements. Yeah, so there's quite a bit of imagery like that, and like I said, with the internet these days, it's a whole lot easier. We had a field day on our farm in 1992. We had over 6,000 people through the gate come and see how to plant trees. This was before the internet, so farmers know how to get out, and in Australia anyway, and I'm sure it's the same elsewhere in the world. Farmers, when they see that something needs to be changed, something needs to be sorted out, they will go looking for solutions. So farmers are generally pretty good at growing stuff, doing stuff. There's a lot of talking here at this. This is my first COP, so it's all a bit overwhelming. But look, I'm going to stop there because I could go all day. But thank you for having me.
Thank you.
So we've got, do you want to come up next? Wonderful. And just introduce yourself and where you farm, that would be brilliant.
Thank you so much. I'm Sheikh Tanvir Hussain, Director Policy and Strategy of IFOM Organization. Although here it is mentioned about the regenerative and agroecology, although we discussed but not much organic perspective, but we actually agree with the discussion that there is not much different about if our goal is same, that to achieve the sustainable food systems. So definition is not the matter in perspective of farmers, because Inofo, one of our sector platform, who are actually working on the intercontinental organic farmers organization, and their actually mission to make the regenerative and the sustainable food systems. So in generally, we have no issue about the definition of different systems, but the issue is farmers' perspective. Farmers actually want to know that what policy and what system they are actually practicing, and how to reach to the consumers, because their main importance is how to get the better price, how to reach to the consumers. And the consumers also want to know how the food is producing, and what system and what components, ingredients they are using. So that actually I need to, maybe we need to discuss more, the agroecology and regenerative agriculture, that how to reach to the consumer's level as a product. Because if as a consumer you like to get a safe, good product, you need to have some authentication. And without that, it is very difficult for the consumer to convince. And for that, many consumers nowadays, particularly in Asian countries, they are very concerned about the trustworthiness and the traceability system. And without this traceability, it is very hard to convince to the consumers, because there are many fraud, many misleading products is coming in the market, and which is very difficult to keep the fairness in the system. So in my perspective, that since organic has a specific guideline, system and the standard, so maybe sometimes it's very hard for people to follow the organic standard and the guideline because of sometimes it may be expensive, but it is good to have something follow. And participatory guarantee system, PGS, is one of the very low-cost domestic and local farm certification system, which may be possible to adopt in the agroecology and regenerative systems, and then it will be more worthwhile and to make the better sustainable food systems. So for me and for IFOM, actually we feel that to protect the farmers, small scale farmers particularly, we find the way that the effort they are giving, that should be returned in proper way. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much indeed. I know there's a couple of questions and points, but is there any farmer perspectives in the room? I know this is a question. Okay, we're going to go questions. Right. Okay, I promised you two here first. So if you'd like to introduce yourself and ask.
My name is Monica Yator from Kenya. I am a pastoralist and a proud one, though we are transitioning now to agro-pastoralism. So my question is to you, Abansek. You talk about the methane emission. I'm sorry because there's bad narrative about pastoralism. And it's an opportunity for you guys to come and support us transition. We are pastoralists because pastoralism is an adaptation to climate change. So that mobility, I agree, it is contributing to biodiversity loss, but then we have an option now. That's why agroecology is very ideal for us, and we have supported farmers. As we speak now, we have transitioned like 2,000 farmers, pastoralist farmers to agro-pastoralists. So we plant crops and as well as keep livestock. So we still opportunity. We have an opportunity to transition, and agroecology is future for us. Thank you.
Great. Can I comment?
Why don't you make your comment first and then we'll...
Okay.
Thank you very much. My name is Salome Wanda. I'm the Executive Director at Africa's Center for Sustainable and Inclusive Development. I have 2 comments to make. The first one is on the indicators. It's very important that we consider the indigenous local knowledge-based indicators when you're coming with the indicators. And this calls for the working with these smallholder farmers and local indigenous peoples from the beginning of when you're thinking of these indicators, so that when you bring them to the community levels, when you're thinking of the outcome, it's very easy to implement because there's that ownership and involvement from the beginning. And the other thing is the confusion that comes with the different approaches that we keep talking about. It's so confusing when you go to the farmers, or as a farmer, you come to me and today it's regenerative, tomorrow you're coming with agroecology, the other day you're coming with climate smart agriculture. And if you're talking about the outcome is the same, we are talking about sustainability, we're talking about transforming agriculture. Why can't we work together as the different stakeholders within agriculture and talk about something that is consistent for the farmers to follow? And that will also give us even that power to work together. And when we are coming to COP and you want the outcome that is friendly to us, we are working together as all the stakeholders in agriculture and food. So I think when you talk about working in silos, this is one of the ways you're working in silos. It's very important we come up with a consistent way and what you want to achieve and work through it. Thank you.
30-second responses. Anyone?
Yeah, no, I mean, we had a great representative from Cameroon over there. We had our panel at the Food for Climate Pavilion. And, you know, I just want to say our focus on methane is really about big companies, right? So we look at 10 biggest dairy, 10 biggest meat companies, and we look at what they're doing on this. And the answer, unfortunately, is not very much. You know, they're like all jumping on a bandwagon with, you know, regenerative agriculture, but there's very little, you know, kind of, and they have, like the 15 one that we looked at, they have revenues the size of GDP of Norway, right? So we're like, why is that revenue not invested into, you know, reducing CO2, into reducing methane, and supporting farmers to be able to do that, you know? Because what we also see, I mean, I know more European situation, right? So there are like companies saying, oh, this actually works, but we're not going to pay for it. Farmers should pay for it. And then farmer goes to the consumer and they're like, are you willing to give us more money for this product, right? But I think it's not the kind of situation we should be in, you know? It's the companies that are making the most profit out of the products that they're selling, that they should be supporting farmers and investing, and also, you know, not charging more consumers who are already struggling with cost of the living crisis. Did I make it 30 seconds?
I think about the confusion that is created. I agree that is a problem, but not all terms are equivalent. I mean, climate smart is trying to focus just on climate issues. There's nutrition sensitive agriculture that looks just at nutrition. Conservation agriculture just looks at soil health. We really need to be thinking about the transformation of the whole system on all the dimensions: economic, environmental, climate, nutrition, health, and social dimensions. And that's why these 13 principles are very important. So a lot of the preference for using different terminology are also justified by the intention to be greenwashing. And it's much easier to say, well, I do climate smart agriculture by just introducing a variety that is slightly more resistant to drought, etc., and saying I'm doing climate smart, while you don't change the system. You still apply industrial monoculture model that is not sustainable. So we really have to be clear on what is behind it.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Rose Lily Ushokunze, and I'm from Food Justice Network in Zimbabwe. So I was going to speak on the semantics of regenerative agroecology, and the confusion really is something that is very important to us as communal farmers, because we find that most of the times we do have the solutions, but when we talk about our solutions, they are not recognized as agroecology. You know, you find our models are called community practices, and we really wonder what these community practices are, because these things that you refer to as community practices are essentially agroecology. And that confusion alone leaves communal farmers out of this, the transforming of the food systems. And you find that we do not even get funding for our initiatives or our models because they do not fit into those terms. And I also believe that when we talk about agroecology, in as much as we have those 13 principles, there is really need to contextualize agroecology, because what we term agroecology in the global south in Zimbabwe, it's something that is a bit different from what you call agroecology, because it's social, it's cultural, it's even religious to us when we talk about food. So there is really need to contextualize the issues. Thank you.
Do you feel that each country should have their own set of principles, or do you feel aligning around outcomes that we want to achieve is more important?
The principles are okay. They guide everyone in the same direction. But then when it comes to implementation now, this is where the difference should be.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, wonderful. I'm sure we've got some more comments and questions over here. Vivian, how long have we got?
Thank you very much
5 minutes.
for the opportunity. I'm Rosina Mbenya. I'm the country coordinator for Pelham Kenya Network. And yeah, I want to just also follow up on the issue of the semantics. And for me, I think it's very crucial for us to look even comprehensively, not one practice in isolation, because some of the things, and just following up from what she has said, we have to look at even traditions. And in Kenya, we have communities whereby if you serve this kind of food, they, for example, they will sit down and wait for the real food. So we need to understand the background, and because food is not just common, so what are the comprehensive ways for us where we are looking at this and that? And the other thing is smallholder farmers are interested in resilience. Resilient building. How are we addressing issues in a proactive way? For example, Kenya, we have had like 5 rainy seasons which have been failing. And when the rain came this year, this is just the season of rain, it's flooding everywhere. Have we supported these farmers to transition? Have we helped them to look at how they can be able to transition? Like Monica here said, the pastoral communities is willing to transition into agroforestry. How do we support farmers to be resilient and to contribute sustainably, looking comprehensive from social issue, cultural issues, economically, environmentally, and not just what's focusing one item in isolation.
Thank you very much. We've got time for one more question or point, and then we will. You have a question?
Can I just make my point?
Yeah.
Perhaps while you're waiting to identify someone.
Sorry.
I think you know what we're trying to illustrate here through various interventions is the fact that we're not going to be able to group and say, here is one thing that is going to work across the board. Of course, not. There are differences between regions, between countries, and we have to respect that. We have to respect the fact that there are practices here that are different to somewhere else. So despite the fact that there are these terminologies just to define certain practices, but don't get sort of bogged down on them. I think the main thing is to voice the practice that you are adopting and why does it work, or there are challenges attached to it and where you need support. Because I think the diversity is the reality of farming, and there are differences everywhere. And that's what we need to focus on. And I agree that we tend to label, you know, certain practices with certain terms and think, you know, that's the solution that is going to work across the board. It's not. And on the coordination, there are silos, absolutely. And I think there is a big improvement that needs to be done there, particularly when we support countries, when we support farmers. What we need to avoid is this confusion of coming from different direction and raising the flag for one thing and saying, yeah, this is the best thing, this is the best thing. That's not how it's going to work. So my final point is that's why it's really great to hear from you, because you're the people actually who experience the reality and say, this is what we would like to see happening. And it's so great because a few years ago, and this is my 15th COP, a few years ago, we never had farmers actually, and to hear, from you guys what you think. And it's so enriching for us that we consider those and go back and think about what works for you, rather than sitting in isolation and drawing a plan that we think is going to work across the board and is going to be magic. So it's good to see the reality really being expressed.
And Adele, maybe one call to action I would also like to make is in this multi-stakeholder initiative called Region 10, we're really trying to move from practice-based to outcome-based. At this COP, the team has worked just on a very comprehensive mapping and what are the most important outcomes for farmers. And Adele will remind you when it is, because I don't have my phone right next to me. But there is a consultation, a farmer consultation. We would like to invite you, and this is the opportunity to express, to share your point of view. But again, it's not on the practices, because we acknowledge farming up our archetypes and contextual is so. It's place-based, and so it's a conversation about what are the most important outcomes that you would like as a farmer that you would like to measure the sustainability of your farm, and that you ultimately would think it's also an important one that you want to be rewarded for by your customers or by your municipalities, because you're providing an essential ecosystem services to your community, like flood management, for example.
My question is actually also a food for thought. These labels and definitions, who exactly does it serve? Is it the consumers? Is it corporations? Is it the farmers? And how are these vested interests guiding the differences and arguments between the definitions? I just thought I should leave it out there, because each time I speak to people, they come from different angles. No, it has to be organic. No, it has to be region. Who exactly is it serving? As a consumer, why should I care? As a farmer, why should I care? And as corporations, what determines what term I take on? I just thought I should leave it out there as a question, but also as a comment. Over.
Well, do you guys, if you want to do 20-second responses?
I just want to do 1 second. I would love to hear the opinion, but I just want to do one correction. Regenerative agriculture is not a standard, is not a label. It is an outcome-based farming approach. So what really is important is it does not want to become a standard or a label and be prescriptive like organic is, which is a very important one. It is more of it's a farming approach. It's an outcome-based farming approach. So it actually, if you're asking, are businesses for example, in my coalition looking to valorize it to farmers? Not at the moment. Why they need it is because it's the resilience of the value chain and the fact that today's agricultural models don't work anymore because we're not in stable climate conditions anymore. So the very intensive monocultural system that we have built doesn't work. We're trying to transition to agricultural models that work with nature, that work within planetary boundaries. And this is it. So it's not about creating a new label. Would love to hear your point
very quickly, because I want to make sure we go back to some of the farmers very quickly.
Really make a very clear distinction between practices, and agroecology is not about a set of practices, it's about a set of principles, and principles that are actually the front end of outcome-based. It's what we would like to see come out of a system, the principles that will guide us. And these principles, as you say, are applicable everywhere. What is different is the practices that are locally adapted, not only to the agricultural or environmental systems, but also to the social, cultural, and religious context in which these are implemented. So I think that's very important to see the universality of principles and the very local application of the practices.
Lisa?
Yeah, I think agroecology is really well defined, and we have organic farming where we have a standard, right? And regenerative agriculture is almost like, corporate response to all of this, them feeling under pressure, and then innovating with this wonderful term when, you know, we have a lot of people that want us to do this, but then, you know, intentionally keeping it quite vague so that, you know, it will be very difficult to measure different outcomes. And yeah, I'm concerned that the way, you know, big companies are using regenerative farming, it's a distraction tactic, you know. And for that reason, we have to be really, really very careful. Like what we also see is like at the European level, Green Deal, several really good initiatives just got killed, you know, like the pesticides. And this is really, really a big problem, right? So I think we have to be careful, and I think we have to reflect that what has been said, you know, in different regions, there are different practices, there are different cultures, there are different, you know, indigenous wisdoms and farming systems and knowledge systems that should be respected, right? But then we have to make sure that, you know, this doesn't get misused and capitalized by, you know, companies that want to maintain status quo, basically.
Thank you. Zituni.
My final point is, you know, whatever methodologies we talk about or definitions or tools, at the end of the day, if we don't make a difference to people's lives on the ground, then, you know, we're failing. You know, everything has to converge into that. That's where the measurement really matters. Have we made the difference to people's lives or not? The resilience to farmers, that's the end point that we need to focus on.
Thank you. And to that point, I just want to make sure the farmers in the room have the last word.
There you go.
Thank you. Look, I think capacity building in Australia has been very successful, and I think it would apply to everybody in many other countries. Putting the ownership back in the farmers' hands. Education about ecological literacy is still, even in Australia where education levels are quite high, ecological literacy amongst farmers is still quite low. So there's a lot of work to be done there. There is measurement systems. Farming for the Future is doing an incredible job at measuring in quite detail emissions of farms, natural capital, and that measurement can only lead to decisions farmers can make about what they're going to do. And it doesn't matter what principles, what practices, it will truly be in the farmers' hands if they're educated, if they're supported, so mentoring through the process. But yeah, I think something else to talk about is supply chain. Transparency, it's been a big issue in a lot of countries, not only for farmers but also for consumers. So I think there's a lot of work to be done there too.
Last word to you guys, I think. Anything you want to say in response?
Okay, my takeaway is that let's support regenerative agriculture, or whatever name you call, but to us it's a traditional form of farming, but now it comes with different names to confuse us. At the end of the day, we will remain indigenous, and we have to protect our indigenous way of life. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that's a brilliant way to end. And thank you all for joining us today. This is a massive topic. We could talk about it for hours, and I'm sure there's another discussion to be had this year, next year, and the year after. But I think we are making progress, and I do think aligning around outcomes is the way that's going to bring us together, so we can allow for that nuance of different practices and what good looks like in different places to shine through, rather than very binary definitions, which are words that everyone argues about the whole time. So thank you very much for joining us. And look forward to continuing the conversation outside. Thanks, everyone.